Hello, and welcome to Hedgehog Storytime, where I read my weird original fiction. The following story is part of the Edie Valley Project, link to the playlist in the description below. Yes, you have to read them all. No, that is not a request. So today is the second patron OC, 2 of 2. I am super pleased to introduce this character. This character is made for John Hummel. Thank you so much, my good sir. I don't know what I would do without both you and Leroy. Oh my god, you two are my heroes. So without further ado, I guess here is in Anno Domini 900, because I couldn't fit it anywhere else in the chapter. The tower was cold, dark, and clammy. Condensation often dripped from its stony walls. Ordinarily, Zare wouldn't have minded so much. It was an old, twisting structure. It was going to do as it wished. The problem was the constant battle to save his books from water damage and rot. Well, he said his books. Everything that involved magic was a little fuzzy. He was 99% sure this tower belonged to him, but he was still always looking out for the real owner of the tower to come striding in and throw him out for being a loony. To be fair, he didn't necessarily look sane. Zare had a passion for long, star-covered robes and pointy hats. Again, he couldn't exactly remember why. He knew there had been a reason, but whatever it was lost on him. That's why he was here in the first place. Just 6 months ago, he'd been a wizard of great power, until, that is, he'd faced a being of immeasurable force and had been forced to use incredibly powerful magic. Unfortunately, he hadn't been strong enough to wield it properly, and though he'd succeeded in holding back this being, his knowledge and magical skill had been taken from him. So here he was, retracing his steps and trying to relearn everything. It was long, hard work, made even more so by the water, and crumbling stone, and occasional tremors from the structure of the tower itself. But if there was one thing that Zare Flooferpoofin was, it was optimistic. So he kept working and learning, and knew that someday he would reclaim his old power. But even he was a little unnerved when one morning before dawn, he looked out the tower window and saw a black horse and rider plodding across the snowy valley towards him. His first thought was that the rider must have been out for a stroll. In the middle of the night, riding as swiftly as his mount could carry him through the bleached landscape. His second thought was that he would ride right past into the dark, but it became apparent that he was slowing down as he approached the base of the tower. His third thought was that his memories had been wrong. He didn't own this tower, and its real owner had returned. Zare couldn't help feeling the air of danger the rider brought with him. He might not just be kicked out. He might end up dead. Until he watched as below, his cloak whipping out around him, the rider dismounted and knocked on the door. Usually, people didn't knock on the doors of their own towers. Zare paused, hoping that maybe, if he didn't move, the man would go away. Then he banged harder, and Zare was nearly shaken to his feet as the tower itself shuddered. He hurried down the spiral steps, cursing his old bones all the way. The man knocked one more time. "I'm coming!" Zare shouted, though whether the man could actually hear him was up to the will of the gods. It appeared, against the odds, that he had, for as Zare creaked down the last few steps, the knocking ceased. He opened the door, and didn't bother looking at the visitor before proclaiming, "Behold, whether man or demon you be, know that I am a wizard of great power, the mighty Zare Flu—" He tried for a fireball, but all he managed was a sad little puff of smoke in the snow before the man's feet. Said visitor stared at it for a second, before turning his gaze back to Zare, who couldn't help noticing the slight disappointment visible in the shrouded features under his hood. The man was pale, with dark hair and nearly darker circles under his eyes, but there was something slightly off about him. The eyes themselves were too old for such an unmarred face. "Are you the master of this tower?" he asked incredulously. "I just told you I am Grand Master Wizard Zare Flooferpoofin. Well, might be slightly more appropriate." The man frowned. "Was?" "Magical accident, I'm afraid. All my knowledge, poof, up in smoke. We'll learn it eventually, of course. Only took me 15 years the first time, but I've begun rambling. What brings you to, my tower?" "Please forgive me. I forgot to introduce myself." The man ducked his head. "My name is Lucius Marcellus, and I was told that the master of this tower might hold some ancient knowledge I seek. But if you've lost all of that—" He began to turn, but Zare stopped him. He wouldn't let this man turn away disappointed, and he liked to be helpful. "Wait," he began. "Though I myself may be lacking in the brains department, my books certainly aren't. They may contain that which you are looking for." Marcellus paused and looked about ready to decline until he happened to glance up at the sky, just beginning to gray with the dawn. "Thank you," he nodded deeply. A grin spreading across his many wrinkles, Zare turned and led the way inside, a skip in his step. It had been so long since he'd had any kind of visitor. "Marcellus," he commented as they climbed the numerous steps. "Had there been less of them on the way down? That's an old name." "It is," Marcellus mumbled, almost to himself. "It's probably near time to change it." There seemed to be something melancholy in the way he said that, the look of loss in his old eyes. But then he shook his head. "Do you need some help?" he asked, as he saw Zare struggling up the last few steps. "Oh, hush," Zare just chuckled. "I'm probably younger than you are." Marcellus froze. "What do you mean?" "I'm only 29. Blinking in the candlelight, Marcellus frowned and looked over at Zare once again, the wrinkled face, the long white beard. 29, he repeated. "Magical accident?" "Magical accident." Finally, the study came into view, and the mountain of stone steps was conquered. Zare hadn't noticed how chaotic this place really was until there was someone else here to see it. His books were scattered in every place he could fit them, every place that wasn't occupied by puddles of water or plant matter. "Now," Zare began apologetically, "what exactly is it that you're looking for?" But Marcellus didn't respond, for just then the tower began to shake again. "Is that normal?" he asked finally. Zare waved him off. "Happens all the time. Old tower and all that." "Right." Marcellus glanced around at the piles and piles of books. Organized chaos was the word of the day. "It may look like a mess, but I guarantee you I know where everything is," Zare defended his collection. Shaking his head, a wry smile crossed Marcellus's face. "All right, then. I'm looking for information on Atlantis. More specifically, why it's a lost city in the first place." Zare blinked several times. He had to admit that he had fully expected something easy, like the uses of mandrake root. Okay, maybe not that, but it was hard to come up with good examples off the top of one's head. "Atlantis," he said. "Hardly anyone even remembers that name anymore. You wouldn't happen to be a wizard yourself, would you?" No. Marcellus shook his head. "Merely a scholar." "No one is a scholar these days unless you're studying God," Zare laughed. "Yes, it does appear that things have headed in that direction." Blundering around the tower room, Zare began to search blindly around. He knew that he had something relevant around here. "You speak as if you've known differently," he mumbled distractedly. "Oh, no, I've just been told stories." "Ah, here it is." Zare pushed aside several musty tomes, and there on the surface of his desk was a tattered scroll. The tower rumbled again, a little stronger this time. They'd been getting more frequent, the rumblings, but Zare hadn't paid them much mind. Marcellus took the scroll and read the first few lines. This is a story." He seemed confused. "Yes, it is." "I'm sorry, but I've heard all the stories. I'm looking for the truth." Slowly, Zare sat on his stool, his old bones creaking. "Isn't there always some truth in every story?" He thought about this for a second, then shrugged. "That may just be a story, but it's your job to find where the truth lies." Unfortunately, just as Marcellus opened his mouth to ask a question, the ground itself began to rumble. Not just the tower, but everything around it as well. The towers of books quickly collapsed, and the one glass window shattered. Marcellus rose to his feet, shakily. "We need to get out of here." He clasped Zare's hand and helped him up as well. They began to wobble their way to the staircase, but with a great crack, a part of the wall crumbled and fell directly over the doorway. "Why do things like this always happen to me?" Marcellus mumbled. "Well," Zare began, "look on the bright side." "Which is?" "Yeah, I can't think of anything." Running over to the newly created hole in the wall, Marcellus looked downwards. No one alive could survive that fall. "Well, I guess that means I'm up." Zare pushed up his loose sleeves. "Help me clear this rug." A large pile of paper and books had landed, or had already covered, the bearskin rug on the floor. Quickly, the two men pushed the mess aside. "Are you going to attempt magic?" Marcellus asked, a little incredulous. "Not attempt. Do." Zare winked. "It's all in the mindset." He closed his eyes, took a deep breath. So what if he hadn't been able to cast even the simplest spell since the accident? The fear of death would provide just the pressure he needed to break this block. "All right, here we go," he thought, trying in vain to remember how it had felt to use magic, how to drag up the last vestiges of power from that far place under the waves and hone it to an edge. He was, and would be, one of the last true wizards. He must be able to do this. Float. "I don't believe it," he heard Marcellus mumble, and opened his eyes. The rug was hovering a few inches off the ground. Zare laughed in relief, but he could already feel the magic fading. There wasn't much time. "Get on!" he commanded, and with a bit of difficulty, Marcellus managed to jump on and pull Zare up behind him. By now, bits of stone were falling on their heads. "Forward!" Zare felt the need to say it out loud in order to hold on to the magic a little longer. The rug shot forward, out of the hole in the wall, and a second later, the whole tower started to collapse in on itself. Marcellus's horse was easy to pick out against the white snow, galloping away from the rapid shaking. Zare brought the rug into a barely controlled dive downwards into the snow. Marcellus hastily pulled his cloak down over his face as the sun rose over the horizon. He recovered much faster than Zare, who struggled to sit up and spit out a face full of snow and fur. "That was certainly an event." Zare laughed, his eyes twinkling as the tower finally crumbled into a puff of snow and a tremendous boom. He was so high off of magic that he nearly fell back down into the snow. Blinking, Marcellus looked more downcast, though it was hard not to with his face in shadow as it was. "Your tower. All of your books. I'm sorry." "Ah, no matter." Zare waved him off. "Everything happens for a reason. I've been thinking of setting off on a journey anyway. There's only so much you can learn from books, you know." "I don't know how you stay so optimistic." Marcellus shook his head. "It's probably more difficult for you," Zare smiled. "I'm pretty sure angst is a legitimate side effect of vampirism." Marcellus began to nod, then froze. "Wait, how did you know about that?" "The way you speak of old things as if they weren't old at all. But your fear of the sun is really what did it." "Is it that obvious?" "No," Zare shook his head. "I'm just much more observant than I appear. But I'm flapping my gums. You, my friend, should get out of the sun. Have you still got the scroll?" Patting his cloak, Marcellus smiled. "Safe and sound, but I shouldn't leave you out here alone." "I'll be all right," Zare insisted. "I'm not the one in physical pain. Your cheek is smoking." He patted his cheek out, and though he still looked conflicted, Marcellus mounted his horse. "Are you sure you'll be all right?" "Don't you have some reading to do?" Marcellus grinned, waved, and set off. "Remember, this is important," Zare called after him. "Find where the truth lies." Once Marcellus had disappeared over the nearest hill, Zare looked down at the bearskin rug. "Now, let's see if I can do this again."